In late 2025, more than 5,000 trucking companies vanished almost overnight. Chapter 12. Bankruptcies surged, freight giant Yellow collapsed, and owner-operators across America watched decades of work erased. A farm crisis in places like Arkansas triggered a chain reaction no one could stop. How did droughts, failing harvests, and a 48% crash in combine sales send nearly 10% of the industry to the brink? And can anyone survive what is coming next? November 2025 brought a reckoning the trucking industry had not seen in decades. In a single month, between 5,000 and 8,000 carriers vanished from the National Registry. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration's own data confirmed a market contraction that dwarfed previous downturns, with the active carrier base dropping from over 2 million to levels not seen since the pandemic. Analysts at Luna Logistics described it as a capacity purge, the sharpest on record. Trucking Dive reported that more companies exited than entered the market in the third quarter, a reversal that signaled something deeper than a routine cycle. The numbers alone tell a story of collapse. Nearly 10% of the industry was lost in just 1 year. By the time the dust settled, more than 10,000 carriers had closed their doors since the start of 2024. Chapter 12, Bankruptcies, once a rare headline, became a grim fixture, with filings surging to levels not seen in modern freight history. The 2023 collapse of Yellow, which erased 30,000 jobs in a single blow, was no longer an outlier, but a warning. Now, the pain was everywhere, from small family fleets to regional haulers, from owner-operators with a single truck to mid-sized carriers with dozens of employees. Industry forums and YouTube channels had predicted a shakeout, but few expected the speed or scale of the bloodbath. Freight analysts warned that the contraction was not over. Early forecasts for the first quarter of 2026 pointed to continued exits, with credit markets tightening and spot rates still below break-even for many. The system, once flush with new entrants and easy money, was now bleeding capacity at a historic rate. The question was no longer if the industry would recover, but how many would survive the winter ahead. Texas International Enterprises had been a fixture in Laredo for 3 decades, hauling everything from produce to auto parts across the border. In December 2025, a warn notice landed in the inboxes of 212 employees, spelling out the end. Dispatchers scrambled to reroute stranded loads. Drivers on the road found fuel cards shut off and paychecks frozen. The company's bankruptcy docket, filed on December 18, 2025, listed nearly $12 million in unpaid invoices and mounting equipment debt. Bankruptcy. At 10 Roads Express, a carrier specializing in mail contracts, the shutdown came with little warning. In January 2026, more than 1,000 drivers were told their routes were canceled. James R. Smith Trucking, a family-run operation out of Alabama, closed after 44 years, leaving 80 drivers and office staff without work. The owner, James Smith Jr., cited insurmountable insurance hikes and an 18-month stretch of below-cost freight rates. Shut down Minstar and Transport Design, 2 Minnesota-based fleets, filed simultaneous. Chapter 12 petitions in late November. Together, they laid off 150 drivers, many of whom had worked for the companies since the 1990s. Montgomery Transport, once a major flatbed hauler for the steel and farm equipment sectors, posted its closure notice on social media in early December. Epic Lightning Fast Service and Kingsley Trucking, both mid-sized regional firms, quietly exited the market, their equipment auctioned off to cover debts. Laid off. Each closure rippled outward. Mechanics, dispatchers, warehouse staff, and hundreds of families suddenly left with no income. For the drivers, many of whom owned their rigs, the loss meant not just a job, but the end of a way of life, passed down through generations. Families. Nearly every trucking company in America runs small. 96% operate fewer than 20 trucks. For owner-operators, the numbers are even starker. Most drive solo or with a single partner, relying on razor-thin margins to keep their rigs on the road. In 2025, the average net income for an owner-operator hovered around $37,000. That figure, once enough to support a family, now barely covers rising insurance, fuel, and maintenance costs. Freight volumes tell a similar story of contraction. The American Trucking Associations reported a 7% drop in national tonnage year over year by the end of the third quarter. Spot market rates, the lifeblood for small fleets, fell 15% from their 2024 levels. For long-haul lanes, volumes collapsed by a quarter, leaving many trucks parked and payments overdue. Used truck values, once a fallback for cash-strapped operators, plunged 20% since 2022, erasing equity and making refinancing impossible. Bankruptcies surged by 30%. For thousands of owner-operators, a single bad month now meant the end of the business. The industry entered the winter of 2025 already weakened, with most small carriers running out of options and time. Flatbed haulers and grain carriers felt the impact first. As 2025 wore on, farm equipment dealers across the Midwest and South reported empty showrooms, not from brisk sales, but from a collapse in demand. Tractor sales dropped 13% year over year, while combine sales fell by nearly half. The Association of Equipment Manufacturers tracked the slide, noting that even industry giant Deere paused shipments as inventories piled up on dealer lots. For trucking firms that specialized in hauling new tractors and combines, the work simply vanished, and many found themselves running empty miles, unable to cover the cost of fuel and insurance. The pain wasn't limited to equipment. After a string of poor harvests and a flood that affected 260,000 acres in Arkansas, many farm operators chose to store their grain rather than sell at depressed prices. Bins filled up, but trucks sat idle. Grain haulers, who once counted on steady loads from rural elevators to river terminals, reported weeks without a single call. In Arkansas alone, the flood wiped out over $1 billion in projected farm income, removing a critical source of freight demand almost overnight. Every unsold bushel meant another deadhead run, another carrier pushed closer to the edge. The link between farm capital spending, grain marketing choices, and rural freight revenue had never been so stark or so fragile. Fertilizer haulers faced a different kind of chaos in 2025. Wholesale fertilizer prices surged by 15 to 19%, according to industry indices, forcing farmers to delay purchases and gamble on the market. Instead of steady freight demand spread across months, the spring brought a sudden, compressed rush. Truckers who once counted on predictable contracts found themselves in a feast or famine cycle, with weeks of idling followed by frantic calls to move product before planting deadlines closed. Josh Linville, a leading fertilizer analyst, described the season as a logistical whiplash. He said, "We saw input buyers sitting on the sidelines, then everyone jumped at once. Trucks simply couldn't cover it all." For many small carriers, this volatility proved fatal. Deferred orders meant lost revenue early in the year, and when the floodgates finally opened, there were not enough rigs or drivers left to handle the surge. The compressed shipping window punished anyone without deep cash reserves or flexible fleets. For fertilizer haulers, the old playbook no longer worked. Survival now depended on timing, luck, and the ability to withstand weeks with no work at all. Paul McAnally's farm sits on the edge of Desha County, Arkansas, ground zero for a disaster that stripped $1.075 billion from the state's agricultural economy in a single season. After the floodwaters swallowed 260,000 acres, his family watched their soybean fields rot in place. The losses did not stop at the farm gate. Jill Beck, who runs a rural supply shop in nearby Tiller, saw her business drop by 3/4 as neighbors canceled orders and unpaid bills stacked up. The local bank, once a lifeline for growers and truckers alike, reported a spike in delinquent loans. By late 2025, regional economists warned that a quarter of Arkansas farm operations could face bankruptcy within the year. The human toll is harder to count. 5 farmer suicides in 14 months left families and entire communities reeling. In towns like McGehee and Dumas, the collapse of farm income rippled outward through empty storefronts, shuttered dealerships, and the silence of trucks that once ran day and night. Operating costs soared 20 to 25% in less than 3 years, while revenue per truck stayed stuck at recession lows. In June 2025, a new federal mandate required all drivers to pass advanced English proficiency exams, pushing thousands of veteran contractors, many with decades of safe driving, out of the workforce overnight. Stephanie Lieb, a bankruptcy attorney, warned that these regulatory shocks made survival impossible for small carriers already operating on razor-thin margins. Jason Miller, a transportation economist, pointed to the drag from ongoing tariffs, which will remain until at least mid-2026, slowing cross-border freight and choking off recovery. Credit markets tightened further, with banks slashing loan approvals and raising interest rates for equipment purchases. Ryan Loy, an industry analyst, forecast that relief might not arrive until the second quarter of 2026. If the current squeeze continues, empty grocery shelves and higher consumer prices could be the next domino to fall. The plea from industry voices is clear. Without targeted relief, the collapse will spread well beyond the highways. Today, with over 5,000 carriers gone and tractor sales at a 13% annual drop, rural America stands at a breaking point. This isn't just a freight crisis, it's a warning. When farms fail, the trucks stop. And when the trucks stop, every corner of the economy feels the shock.